Stop. Did you really think that behind those angelic smiles and fragile images there were innocent souls? You were wrong. Classic Hollywood was not just diamonds and eternal love on screen, but a boiling cauldron of passion, lust, and moral decay. While millions of women dreamed of being like them, these 10 actresses changed lovers as easily as gloves, shattered families, and never shed a single tear. They were queens of the screen, but off-camera, they were true predators, for whom sex was currency and loyalty meant nothing. Today, I will tear the masks off the most promiscuous stars, whose names became legends, but whose beds knew dozens of men. You will learn who could not survive a single day without a new affair, who slept with producers for roles, and who broke even married colleagues' hearts without the slightest flicker of remorse. And the final story will turn your idea of morality upside down. The most sexually magnetic star in Hollywood, who gave herself to hundreds of men, yet died alone, surrounded by the ghosts of former lovers. Watch until the end. The truth will shock you. But before we begin with the first actress, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and leave a comment. Enjoy the show.
Elizabeth Taylor. She was the embodiment of luxury, beauty, and an endless, almost pathological hunger for male attention. Elizabeth Taylor, a woman who lived through 8 official marriages and countless affairs in between, became a symbol of excess and moral collapse in prim, hypocritical Hollywood. One love was never enough for her. One life, one man, never enough. She took whatever she wanted, ignoring social rules, other people's feelings, and even her own reputation. For her, fidelity was a concept whose meaning shifted depending on who happened to be in her bed at the moment. Elizabeth was not merely an actress. She was a natural disaster, destroying everything in her path for the sake of another dose of passion. Her rise to the title of the world's most scandalous woman began early. At 18, when other girls were only dreaming of dates, Liz was already walking down the aisle with Conrad Nicky Hilton Jr., heir to the vast hotel empire. The marriage, which looked like a fairy tale, lasted just 8 months. The reason was not only Hilton's difficult nature, but Elizabeth's complete disappointment. She was bored to death. Even then, she understood that her beauty was a universal key, opening doors to a world without prohibitions. Her second marriage, to British actor Michael Wilding, was an attempt to find stability, but how long could a predator stay in a cage? While Wilding played the role of the devoted husband, Taylor turned film sets into her personal hunting grounds. Colleagues whispered that she never missed a handsome co-star, while her husband helplessly looked the other way, afraid of losing this untamable fury whose appetites grew by the day. The real explosion came in 1957, when Elizabeth married producer Mike Todd. He was her first true passion, a man who could match her fire. But fate intervened. Todd died in a plane crash just a year later. One might think this would be a time for mourning, but Hollywood's Black Widow never knew how to grieve alone. Before the tears on her cheeks had even dried, she began an affair with Eddie Fisher, her late husband's best friend. And this was no ordinary affair. It was a public slap in the face to society. Fisher was married to Debbie Reynolds, America's sweetheart, and by bitter irony, Taylor's close friend. The scandal was so filthy and cynical that the Vatican officially condemned Elizabeth for immoral behavior. She did not care about the Pope or about her friend's crushed heart. She simply took Fisher as another toy, destroyed his family, and married him, her 4th marriage, because she wanted to. She lived by instinct, completely ignoring any moral code. Even that scandal, however, paled in comparison to the madness that erupted on the set of Cleopatra in Rome. It was there that Elizabeth met Richard Burton. Their affair became the loudest and most destructive liaison in film history. Both were married, Burton to his devoted wife Sybil, the mother of his children, and Taylor to Eddie Fisher, whom she had already used up. Their passion was so blatant and shameless that the production turned into an endless series of drunken brawls, public scenes of jealousy, and sex right in the dressing rooms. Paparazzi camped outside their windows, catching glimpses of their depraved intimacy. Burton called her a beautiful, impossible child, but in truth it was a bond between two adrenaline addicts. She married him for the 5th time, then they divorced in scandal, only to remarry a year later, her 6th marriage. It was a vicious circle of infidelity, alcohol, and mutual destruction. Taylor never knew moderation. After Burton, her list included Senator John Warner and even an ordinary construction worker, Larry Fortensky, 20 years her junior. She changed men not for love, but for possession. Each new marriage was a way to fill the inner void that even the most expensive diamonds in the world could not conceal. Elizabeth Taylor died at 79, leaving behind legendary roles and a mountain of broken lives. She was a woman who proved that behind dazzling violet eyes can hide absolute indiscrimination. She did not simply change men like gloves, she discarded them the moment they stopped giving her that electric charge. Her life was an endless pursuit of pleasure, paid for by everyone around her, except herself. She was and remains the queen of Hollywood, whose crown was forged from gold and pure, unadulterated debauchery.
Joan Crawford was not just an actress. She was a corporation built on blood, sweat, and an endless ledger of male bodies she used as the foundation of her fame. If Elizabeth Taylor chased passion, Joan chased power. She was a woman with a death grip and an ice-cold heart, for whom sex was never about emotion, it was pure currency, a means of payment for higher billing and the favor of studio bosses. While fans admired her as a strong, independent woman, those inside the industry knew the truth. Joan was Hollywood's most dangerous predator, willing to climb into bed with anyone who could be useful to her. Her rise from poverty to the heights of Olympus was littered with the skeletons of deceived men. Early in her career, nothing was off limits. Rumors persisted for decades that adult films featuring a very young Joan were locked away in intelligence archives and private collections, desperate work she took on simply to avoid starving. But once she reached Hollywood, her appetites grew. She quickly learned that talent was helpful, but access to a producer's body was a guaranteed contract. She slept with administrators, casting directors, even lighting technicians if she believed it would make her look better on screen. The concept of forbidden fruit did not exist for her. Her first major marriage to Douglas Fairbanks Jr., the prince of Hollywood royalty, was little more than a facade. While Douglas tried to build a home, Joan turned their house into a revolving door for lovers. She didn't just cheat, she did it brazenly. Her insatiable sexuality was a tool of self-assertion. She had to possess every man who attracted the attention of others. The loudest and most disgraceful scandal was her long affair with Clark Gable. The king of Hollywood was her mirror image, just as ambitious and just as ruthless. Their connection was so raw and filthy that even seasoned editors blushed watching the sparks they threw off on screen. Gable was married to Rita Langham, a woman much older than he was, who had bankrolled his career. That didn't stop Joan. On the contrary, a taken man only fueled her as art. She seduced Clark between takes, in his trailer, in full view of the entire crew. MGM spent thousands bribing journalists to bury reports of their nightly excesses. At one point, studio head Louis B. Mayer confronted her directly. "If you don't stop spreading your legs for Gable, your career is over." Joan laughed in his face. She knew she was too valuable an asset. She destroyed Gable's marriage, but the moment he was free, she lost interest. She didn't want a husband, she wanted a trophy. Next on her list of men she had used up was actor Franchot Tone. He was an intellectual, a man of delicate inner life. Joan devoured him. She cheated openly, bringing lovers into their shared home and forcing Tone to feel small and humiliated. She exploited his connections to break into New York high society, and once she had everything she wanted, she discarded him like a crumpled newspaper. After the divorce, Tone never recovered, sinking into alcoholism, while Crawford was already scouting her next victim among the executives of the Pepsi-Cola Corporation. Crawford was a master of manipulation and black publicity. She crafted the image of the perfect mother by adopting children, but behind closed doors, she turned their lives into hell, using them merely as props for glossy magazine spreads. Her sexual indiscrimination knew no limits. In later years, she surrounded herself with very young men, quite literally buying their attention. She was a woman incapable of love because she loved only her own reflection in the mirror and the power her body gave her. Joan Crawford died alone in her immaculately clean apartment, surrounded by furniture wrapped in plastic covers. In the end, she remained exactly who she had always been, a cold, calculating machine that spent decades changing men like gloves, yet never managed to fill the void inside herself. She was the Iron Lady who carved her way into history through thousands of Chujich Postelis, leaving behind only the scent of expensive perfume and a long trail of shattered lives.
Marlene Dietrich. Marlene Dietrich was not just a woman, she was a weapon of mass seduction. With her arrival on Hollywood screens, the industry learned what true, perverse, and utterly unrestrained freedom looked like. While other actresses of the era at least pretended to respect decency, Dietrich burned every bridge to virtue at the very start of her journey. She was a woman without boundaries, moral or sexual. She changed men as effortlessly as she removed her famous silk top hats, yet her appetites went far further. The most beautiful women of the age appeared in her bed with the same regularity. Marlene was the queen of bisexual chaos, turning her private life into an endless experiment in dismantling public morality. Her official marriage to Rudolf Sieber was the greatest masquerade of the Golden Age. They married in Berlin, and Sieber remained her legal husband until her death, but the union was nothing more than a convenient facade. In reality, Marlene lived the life of an absolute predator. Sieber didn't just know about her countless lovers, he cataloged them. While Marlene carried on torrid affairs on film sets in the United States, her husband lived in Europe with a mistress whom Marlene herself financially supported and even advised on how to care for Rudolph. It was a twisted version of family life, where fidelity was considered obsolete and lust elevated to the level of art. Dietrich was insatiable. The list of her conquests reads like a who's who of the 20th century. She slept with the great writer Erich Maria Remarque, turning his life into emotional turbulence that nearly destroyed him. The author of All Quiet on the Western Front worshipped her, wrote her hundreds of letters, while she openly welcomed others into her bed. Her affair with French actor Jean Gabin resembled a prolonged war. They fought, reconciled, and betrayed each other with such ferocity that neighbors called the police. Gabin longed for domestic peace and loyalty, but Marlene only laughed in his face. She belonged to no one. Even the future U.S. President John F. Kennedy could not resist her charm. Their brief but vivid hotel affair was whispered about in White House corridors for decades. The most scandalous chapter of Dietrich's life, however, was her passion for women. In Hollywood, she was jokingly called the main supplier of lace lingerie to her female friends. She made no effort to hide her relationships with famous actresses and singers. Her romance with Edith Piaf was filled with drama and mutual adoration, while her liaison with Claudette Colbert became studio legend at Paramount.
Marlene adored men's suits, not only because they suited her, but because they emphasized her dominant role in relationships with women. She was a hunter without mercy, regardless of who became the object of her desire. She used sex as a way to control reality itself. Directors who worked with her often became her slaves. Joseph von Sternberg, who essentially created her image as the Blue Angel, was so obsessed with Marlene that he destroyed his career and family for her whims. And she, the moment he ceased to be useful to her professional ascent, she discarded him like an old stage prop. For Dietrich, people were colors on a palette, tools to paint her dazzling image, ruthlessly washed away once the picture was complete. Her cynicism knew no limits. She could conduct correspondence with 3 lovers at once, promising each eternal devotion while dining with a 4th the same evening. She called it European freedom, but in truth it was a pathological inability to form deep attachment. Marlene was empty inside, and that emptiness demanded constant filling, with new bodies, new emotions, new scandals. Even during the Second World War, while performing for soldiers, she managed to start affairs with generals and enlisted men alike, turning the front line into her personal playground. Marlene Dietrich ended her days in Paris, locked inside her apartment on Avenue Montaigne. She did not want the world to see her old, because her only true capital had always been her sexuality. Surrounded by bottles of whiskey and photographs of past conquests, she died in complete solitude, abandoned by everyone she had once used. The thousands of men and women who had passed through her bed vanished, leaving only a bitter aftertaste of disillusionment.
Rita Hayworth. Rita Hayworth was America's ultimate erotic dream of the 1940s. When in Gilda, she slowly slid a single long glove from her arm, men in movie theaters quite literally stopped breathing. Her face was painted on the atomic bomb dropped at Bikini Atoll, and the symbolism was perfect. Rita herself was a bomb, detonating in the beds of the most powerful men on the planet and leaving scorched earth behind. Yet behind the dazzling facade of the love goddess lived a woman whose sexual indiscrimination bordered on madness, and whose near-total lack of intellect made her easy prey for anyone who wanted nothing more than to use her body. Her career began in exploitation. Her own father, Eduardo Cancino, put her on display in cheap Mexican nightclubs, and her first husband, Edward Judson, effectively sold her as an escort to high-ranking Hollywood officials to secure lucrative contracts for her. Rita grew accustomed to the idea that her body was merchandise, and in time she began to distribute that merchandise herself with astonishing generosity. She didn't simply change men, she was addicted to seeking validation through sex. While Columbia Pictures was crafting her image as an untouchable fantasy, Rita was sleeping with almost anyone who showed interest, from lighting technicians on set to millionaires in private clubs. Her marriage to the genius Orson Welles resembled a union between a professor and a trained monkey. Welles, armed with a formidable intellect, quickly realized that his wife was a beautiful void, her worldview limited to choosing lipstick shades. To fill the intellectual emptiness, Rita began cheating on him relentlessly. While Orson wrote scripts for great films, Rita found comfort in the arms of random partners. She wasn't looking for love, she needed physical proof that she was still desired. Her promiscuity eventually led Welles to openly despise her, dismissing her as an overgrown child with a woman's body. The loudest scandal to rock both sides of the Atlantic erupted when Rita abandoned Hollywood for Prince Ali Khan. The world believed it was a Cinderella story, but the reality was far uglier. Ali Khan was a notorious playboy, and Rita was just another prestigious addition to his collection. But the goddess herself had no intention of remaining faithful in a palace. Life in a Muslim country demanded restraint, yet Rita could not survive without male attention.
She threw drunken tantrums, openly flirted with the prince's guests, and carried on affairs right under the nose of her powerful father-in-law, Aga Khan III. Her behavior was so scandalous that it sparked an international diplomatic incident. In the end, the prince simply threw her out, unable to endure her constant infidelities and staggering stupidity. Back in Hollywood, Hayworth completely lost control. She married singer Dick Haymes, a chronic debtor and a failure. Why? Because he was good in bed. That was the only criterion Rita used when choosing men at that stage of her life. She paid off his debts, endured his violence, and continued sleeping with him until her money ran out. Colleagues recalled that between takes, she might disappear with the first stuntman she met, simply to relieve stress. She was dependent on male warmth the way an addict depends on a fix, and that dependency erased the last traces of her dignity. Rita Hayworth was a woman who had the world at her feet, yet chose to spend her life lying beneath the feet of hundreds of men. Her beauty was her curse, because beneath it there was nothing. No character, no intellect, no will. She ended her days imprisoned by Alzheimer's disease, reduced to a shadow of the woman once worshipped by millions. The real tragedy was that even when her memory still functioned, it held nothing but the faces of countless lovers whose names she forgot the next morning. She was the greatest hollow idol of the Golden Age, proof that even goddesses can become ordinary libertines when they possess nothing beyond a beautiful face and a compliant body.
Lana Turner. Lana Turner was the living embodiment of cheap glitter. The legend goes that she was discovered in a cafe, sipping cola at 15, a schoolgirl in a tight sweater. Hollywood instantly understood how to sell that flesh. Lana became the symbol of accessible, tantalizing sexuality. While MGM molded her into the wholesome girl next door, the real Lana was a woman whose bedroom was never empty and whose list of husbands grew faster than her filmography. 7 husbands, 8 weddings, and hundreds of lovers, Lana Turner didn't just change men, she turned her life into an endless series about lust and indiscrimination, each new episode dirtier than the last. Her first marriage to jazz musician Artie Shaw was the perfect illustration of her impulsiveness. They eloped and married the very night they met. The union lasted 4 months, setting the rhythm for the rest of her life. Lana was pathologically incapable of being alone. She needed someone constantly holding her hand, paying her bills, and above all, satisfying her insatiable appetite. She married actors, millionaires, restaurateurs, even a hypnotist. It made no difference who stood beside her at the altar, as long as he had sexual potency and the patience to endure her moods. Her true nature, however, revealed itself between marriages. She was notorious for collecting the most desirable men in Hollywood. She had affairs with Clark Gable, Frank Sinatra, Howard Hughes, and Tyrone Power, never bothered by the fact that many of them had wives and children. She was a predatory destroyer. If she wanted a man, she took him, used him, and moved on. Tyrone Power was her greatest obsession, and for him she terminated a pregnancy so as not to interrupt her career or burden her lover. To Lana, a child was an obstacle to sexual freedom. Her selfishness was so extreme that her immediate desires outweighed any sense of responsibility or consequence. The climax of her depravity came in an affair that ended in blood and global disgrace. In 1957, bored with respectable men, Lana became involved with Johnny Stompanato, the bodyguard of gangster Mickey Cohen. Stompanato was a textbook bad boy, a parasite with violent tendencies. Lana was thrilled. Danger and brute force excited her. She spent thousands on him, took him to resorts, and endured his abuse because in bed he gave her what polished movie stars could not. All of Hollywood knew that a top-tier star was sleeping with a petty thug, but Lana didn't care. She was addicted to the filth of the relationship.
The finale became the loudest scandal of the decade. In April 1958, during yet another violent argument, Lana's 14-year-old daughter, Cheryl Crane, stabbed Johnny Stompanato in her mother's bedroom. The court ruled it a justified killing, but the truth was darker. Many whispered that Lana herself had killed her lover in a jealous rage and sacrificed her daughter to avoid prison. The tragedy forever sealed Lana's image as a woman whose lust led to death. She turned her daughter's life into hell simply because she could not control her sexual impulses or her attraction to scum. Even after that, Lana did not stop. She married twice more, continuing to seek comfort in the arms of random men. She was a woman incapable of critical thought. Her intellect was devoted solely to marketing her fading beauty. She was empty, like an uncorked bottle of champagne, foam without substance. She didn't read, she wasn't interested in art. Her only passion was her own body and its effect on men. Lana Turner died in 1995. By then, the younger generation had forgotten her, and the older one remembered her not for her films, but for the number of men who passed through her life. She was an icon whose biography reads like a Vice Squad interrogation report. 7 husbands failed to give her what she sought, because she herself never knew what she wanted beyond the endless act of seduction. She entered history as Hollywood's most shameless blonde, for whom marriage was nothing more than a brief pause between 2 casual affairs.
Ingrid Bergman. If there was an image in Hollywood once considered untouchable, it was Ingrid Bergman. She was called Saint Ingrid. Nordic purity, minimal makeup, an innocent gaze, and roles as nuns and self-sacrificing heroines turned her, in the public eye, into the very standard of virtue. America believed Bergman was a woman who knew nothing of lies, lust, or betrayal. But the reality was so sordid that when the truth finally surfaced, it caused not just a scandal, but a genuine tectonic shift in the minds of millions. Ingrid Bergman proved to be a great actress not only on screen, but in life as well, spending years hiding, behind the mask of righteousness, the nature of a woman willing to trample her own family and public morality for the sake of momentary passion. It all began when Saint Ingrid, married to Swedish Dr. Petter Lindström and raising a young daughter, suddenly became inspired by the work of Italian director Roberto Rossellini. She wrote him a letter filled with feigned humility, offering herself as an actress. But the moment they met on the set of Stromboli, the professional relationship instantly turned into a sordid, adulterous affair. Ingrid Bergman, whom America worshipped as the model of motherhood and fidelity, didn't merely cheat on her husband, she did so with calculated cynicism. She became pregnant by Rossellini while still legally married to Lindström and made no real effort to hide it. When news of the Hollywood nun's pregnancy spread across the world, shock followed. This was an era when morality still carried weight, and Bergman's betrayal was taken as a personal insult in countless homes. The public felt deceived. The woman who preached purity from the screen turned out to be an ordinary adulteress who traded her honor and her child for an Italian lover. The scandal grew so massive that Ingrid Bergman was publicly condemned from official podiums. Senator Edwin Johnson spoke before the U.S. Congress, calling her an instrument of evil and an apostle of moral decay. There were calls to bar her from returning to the country and even to burn her films. And what did Saint Ingrid do? She displayed astonishing coldness. She abandoned her young daughter Pia in America and left for Italy to be with Rossellini. For many years she did not see her first child, choosing instead to enjoy her new life and the children she bore with the director. Her maternal instinct proved to be just as false as her on-screen purity.
She lived in Italy, giving birth to children out of wedlock until a divorce could be arranged, and never once expressed remorse. For her, personal desire and sexual attraction to Rossellini stood above duty, above love for her first child, and above respect for the audience that had placed her on a pedestal. As often happens with women of this type, her great love for Rossellini soon began to crack. Once the passion cooled and everyday life and creative failures set in, Bergman started seeking comfort elsewhere. It became clear that she was incapable of loyalty even to the man for whom she had destroyed her former life. She continued shifting priorities and men until her marriage to the Italian collapsed as loudly as the first. Ingrid Bergman was a woman who loved only the state of being in love, not the men themselves. Men were merely fuel for her inner egoism. A few years later, once the dust had settled, Hollywood, the very den of hypocrisy, welcomed her back and even handed her another Oscar. But the stain on her reputation never fully disappeared. Ingrid Bergman proved to the world that the purest appearance can conceal the darkest ingratitude and moral looseness. She was a woman who masterfully manipulated the emotions of millions while remaining utterly empty and selfish. Someone for whom nothing was sacred except her own pleasure. She died at 67, leaving behind the myth of a great actress, but those who knew the truth remembered her as a woman who betrayed everyone who loved her for the sake of a fleeting whim.
Ava Gardner. If Hollywood were a jungle, Ava Gardner would have been its most dangerous and beautiful predator. She was called the most beautiful animal in the world, and that was no studio slogan from Universal. It was a verdict. There was not a trace of refinement or manufactured modesty in her, despite every effort by publicists to tame her image. Ava embodied raw, primal sexuality that recognized no boundaries, no rules, and certainly no marital fidelity. Men were prey to her, something to be hunted, dominated, and discarded the moment the thrill of the chase gave way to boredom. Her sexual indiscrimination became legendary. She gave herself to anyone who sparked even a flicker of interest, whether a famous singer, a penniless bullfighter, or a random sailor in a harbor bar. Her trail of ruined men began with Mickey Rooney, the biggest star of the era. Rooney was box office royalty, but to Ava he was merely a ticket into high society. She married him as an innocent bride, at least according to the official legend. But within a year, Mickey realized that his young wife had turned their marriage into a non-stop carnival of infidelity. Ava didn't just stray, she did it with feral enthusiasm. One man was never enough. She craved the attention of an entire crowd. She could abandon her husband at a party and disappear into the night with the first stranger who offered her a drink. Rooney, accustomed to being the center of the universe, was crushed by a woman who saw him not as an idol, but as an inconvenience to her nocturnal adventures. Then came Artie Shaw, who tried to civilize Ava by pushing books and art her way. Gardner quickly made it clear that her intelligence lived not in her mind, but in her instincts. She had no intention of becoming cultured. She wanted to remain desirable. Shaw was discarded as easily as the husband before him, clearing the stage for the most explosive and destructive romance in show business history, Frank Sinatra. Frank was at the height of his fame, married to Nancy Barbato with 3 children, but for Ava, that only added spice. She took him away from his family with shocking ease, as if lifting a wallet from a blind man's pocket. Their marriage resembled a brutal bullfight. Sinatra worshipped Ava, ready to abase himself for her, but Gardner despised weakness. The more he loved her, the more mercilessly she humiliated him with endless affairs. She fled to Spain, where she threw herself into relationships with bullfighters, drawn to the proximity of blood and danger. It thrilled her far more than her husband's tender songs. Sinatra spiraled under the weight of her betrayals, while Ava carried on her life of excess, barely bothering to acknowledge his suffering. To her, the pain of the king of popular music was nothing more than background noise to her own feverish existence. She was a pure egoist, for whom another person's feelings mattered only if they fed her vanity. Ava Gardner never hid her promiscuity. She openly said that sex meant no more to her than a game of cards. She drank heavily, swore like a dock worker, and slept with whomever she pleased, indifferent to reputation or consequence. Her bed included billionaire Howard Hughes, whom she once struck across the face with an ashtray, writer Ernest Hemingway, with whom she shared a strange, almost mystical bond forged through alcohol and brutality, and countless nameless lovers whose identities she never bothered to remember. Her beauty was her armor, allowing her to act without restraint. She ended her days in London, worn down by decades of excess. By the end, the most beautiful animal had become a lonely, exhausted woman who spoke more often to her dog than to people. The men vanished, some gone forever, others finally strong enough to escape her toxic gravity. Ava Gardner was a woman who took everything life offered, yet never grasped that people are not possessions. She remains a symbol of savage, inhuman beauty, behind which lay nothing but cold indifference and an endless hunger for ever darker sensations. She was Hollywood's true predator, devouring everyone who loved her, and still left starving in her empty house.
Mae West. While all the other actresses on this list at least tried to cover their exploits with the fig leaf of true love or artistic searching, Mae West put her debauchery right in the shop window and slapped a price tag on it. She didn't just change men like gloves, she turned it into a cult, a philosophy, and a multi-million-dollar business. Mae was the first woman in Hollywood to openly declare, "I don't need a husband, I need lovers, and the more the better." She was a walking scandal, a woman whose tongue was sharper than a razor and whose appetites knew no limits. For her, sex was not an intimate act, but a sport, a means of domination, and the main entertainment of her life. Her career began with a prison sentence, and that says everything about her biography. In 1927, she was jailed for 10 days for corrupting public morals because of her own play titled Sex. But prison didn't reform Mae, it simply taught her that vice could be enormously profitable. When she arrived in Hollywood, she brought with her the image of a vulgar, busty blonde who didn't wait to be seduced, but chose her prey straight from the crowd. She was a vamp in the most literal, down-to-earth sense. Her legendary line, "Is that a gun in your pocket, or are you just glad to see me?" became her life's motto. She viewed the world exclusively through the prism of sexuality. Mae West was officially married only once in her youth and spent the next 30 years hiding the fact so as not to damage her image as available and free. Fidelity meant nothing to her. Hundreds of men passed through her Hollywood mansion, decorated like a tasteless brothel with gold mirrors and cherubs. She didn't choose by status. Heavyweight boxers, professional wrestlers, gangsters from Al Capone's circle, even her own bodyguards ended up in her bed. Mae adored brute male strength. She surrounded herself with muscular athletes she called her boys, using them as living accessories. Her cynicism towards
towards men was absolute. She openly said that a man, to her, was a piece of furniture you occasionally need to move. She never had a broken heart because she never had a heart at all, only instincts. While other actresses cried over unrequited love, Mae simply ordered herself a new set of lovers. She was so obsessed with her sexual power that even in her 80s she hired young bodybuilders to carry her around and maintain the illusion that she was still the world's supreme seductress. It was both pitiable and unsettling. A frail old woman in a corset flirting with young men who could have been her great-grandsons. Mae West possessed neither classical beauty nor genuine acting depth. Her only true talent was the ability to sell vulgarity in glossy packaging. Intellectually, she was empty. Nothing interested her beyond herself and the number of men in her bed. She didn't read books, she dictated them, and every one was about her. Her egocentrism was matched only by her shamelessness. She proved to Hollywood that one could be utterly amoral, vulgar, and indiscriminate and still become an icon. She died at 87, leaving behind a mountain of autobiographies filled with lies and boasts about her sexual conquests. Mae West lived her life like one long party in a cheap bar. There was no mystery in her, no depth, only endless double entendres and an endless parade of male bodies. She was the grandmother of Hollywood debauchery, the woman who showed everyone else the road into the abyss, where flesh matters more than soul and quantity always outweighs quality.
Tallulah Bankhead. If debauchery had a name, it would be Tallulah Bankhead. She wasn't just an actress, she was a natural disaster that tore through Hollywood and Broadway alike, leaving shattered reputations and mountains of empty bottles in her wake. While other stars tried to play the role of ladies, Tallulah proudly wore the title of the most shameless and filthy woman in the entertainment industry. Her low, smoke-soaked voice and habit of calling everyone darling were merely a cover for a nature that recognized no human laws. For Tallulah, morality did not exist, prohibitions did not exist, and, most shocking for her era, gender did not exist when it came to the bedroom. Tallulah was the daughter of the Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives, born into an elite political family, yet she did everything in her power to disgrace her name. Her sexual indiscrimination was so extreme that she was dubbed the most available woman on both sides of the Atlantic. She didn't just change men like gloves, she discarded them like disposable napkins. And she didn't limit herself to men. Bankhead was openly bisexual at a time when such honesty could end a career forever. She turned her parties into full-scale orgies where alcohol flowed endlessly and guests lost any remaining sense of decorum. Her appetites were so wild that Paramount was forced to hire entire teams of fixers to cover up her escapades. She slept with co-stars, with directors, with the directors' wives, and even with their drivers. It made no difference to her who stood before her, whether the legendary Greta Garbo or a random bartender. Hollywood buzzed with stories of her affair with actress Hattie McDaniel and her fiery nights with Marlene Dietrich. Tallulah did not understand the word no. She was addicted to physical pleasure and believed that any form of restraint was a sign of boredom and small-mindedness. Her only marriage to actor John Emery was a farce that lasted just 4 years. Emery could not endure living in a house that had effectively become a public brothel, where Tallulah might appear in the living room completely naked in front of a crowd of guests. She despised clothing and often granted interviews while lounging in a bathtub or strolling through her home unclothed. There was no aesthetic behind it, only shock value and total shamelessness. She famously declared, "My father warned me about men and alcohol, but he never said a word about women and cocaine." That line became her personal manifesto. Tallulah's intellect was devoted entirely to self-destruction.
She was witty, but her humor was venomous, designed to humiliate those around her. She didn't read scripts, she devoured them, just as she devoured her lovers. People were nothing more than tools to relieve her boredom. She could start an affair simply because she liked someone's shoes, then discard them an hour later if they proved insufficiently impressive in bed. Her egocentrism knew no bounds. The world was meant to revolve around her desires, her addictions, and her lust. By the end of her life, Tallulah had become a caricature of herself. Ravaged by alcohol, drugs, and relentless excess, she continued to shock the public, but no longer inspired awe, only pity. She was a woman who burned her life at both ends and discovered that nothing remained in the middle but gray ash. She died at 66, and her reported last words were, "Codeine, bourbon." It was the perfect summary of her existence. Tallulah Bankhead remains in history as a symbol of absolute, unrestrained licentiousness. She proved that one could possess talent and pedigree and still pour everything down the drain for fleeting pleasures. She was a hurricane of a woman who built nothing except the myth of her own corruption, and in that myth she was the sole queen, ruling a reign that was brief, sordid, and utterly meaningless.
Gloria Grahame. We have reached the darkest and dirtiest chapter of our investigation. If the previous heroines merely moved from man to man, Gloria Grahame crossed a line that made even the most hardened Hollywood cynics recoil. An Academy Award winner, the reigning queen of film noir with her perpetually swollen lips and the gaze of a bad girl, Gloria revealed herself as a predator for whom neither loyalty nor the most basic laws of human morality existed. She was not simply promiscuous. She was a woman who erased the boundary between maternal duty and sexual desire, committing one of the most repulsive betrayals of the Golden Age. Her career was built on portraying dangerous temptresses, yet in real life, Gloria proved far more unsettling than any of her screen roles. She was married 4 times, and each marriage was soaked in deceit and infidelity. The most fateful union was with the celebrated director Nicholas Ray. While Ray was creating his masterpieces, Gloria turned their home into a testing ground for her compulsions. One man, even a genius, was never enough. She craved new sensations and found them in the most forbidden place imaginable, within her husband's own household.
The domestic ideal of Nicholas Ray shattered on that fateful day when he discovered that Gloria had found herself a new favorite right under their own roof. This wasn't just another colleague or a chance acquaintance. Gloria committed the unthinkable. She crossed the line separating stepmother from stepson, choosing her husband's own son, Anthony Ray, as the object of her desire. This betrayal dealt a devastating blow to the very foundation of family morality. Instead of being a pillar of support and a mentor for the boy, Gloria turned him into a player in her sordid games, destroying his father's trust and forever poisoning the atmosphere of their home. For Nicholas Ray, this was the point of no return. An immediate divorce followed, and Gloria was publicly exiled from the inner circle. Hollywood, which for years had turned a blind eye to her endless flings, shuddered this time at the sheer depth of her cynicism. The reputation of an actress who desecrated the sacred bonds of family for the sake of her own ego spiraled into an abyss from which she was never destined to emerge. Yet Gloria Grahame felt no remorse. She possessed a particular kind of narcissism that convinces a person their own desires justify any act. After the divorce, she continued a life of aimless affairs and alcohol, but 8 years later she delivered the final blow to her reputation. She formally married Anthony Ray, the very stepson with whom she had once been involved while he was underage.
A stepmother became a wife. The marriage was a public provocation, an insult to society and to her former husband. She bore Anthony 2 children, who were at once the grandchildren of her first husband and her own offspring. This twisted knot of taboo sealed her image forever.
Inside, Gloria was empty. Whatever intelligence she had was devoted solely to manipulating men and preserving her fading appearance. Obsessed with her sexuality, she subjected her lips to repeated cosmetic surgeries until her face lost its natural expression, becoming a rigid mask. Nothing interested her beyond how she appeared in the eyes of the next lover. She drained the men around her, leaving nothing behind but humiliation. She died at 57 from cancer, and her passing stirred little grief. Gloria Grahame remained in memory as a woman who trampled everything sacred to satisfy her ego. She was an icon of style who became a symbol of decay, a figure whose beauty was only a thin wrapping around something rotten within. Her story closes our list in darkness, a stark reminder that unchecked indulgence leads not to freedom, but to moral disfigurement. She seemed to possess everything, yet in the end she lost the very essence of humanity. We have reached the final point of our investigation. 10 lives, 10 so-called icons paraded before us, women who for decades embodied beauty, style, and femininity. And what remained when the guilt was stripped away? Emptiness, egocentrism, and an endless, unsatisfied hunger for physical gratification. Behind the polished gestures and rehearsed sighs were women for whom fidelity was nothing more than a line from a bad script, and love merely another surge of adrenaline found in someone else's bed.
Classic Hollywood was not a moral golden age, no matter how insistently retro postcards try to sell it to us. It was a colossal factory that processed human lives, where lust served as fuel and indiscrimination was a professional skill. Elizabeth Taylor, Joan Crawford, Ava Gardner, and others like them were all hostages to their own inner emptiness. Possessing the world, they lacked the one thing that mattered most, the capacity for deep human feeling. They changed men like gloves, not because they were searching for the one, but because inside each of them yawned a black hole that could not be filled by 8 marriages, hundreds of lovers, or million-dollar paychecks. Their tragedy lies in the fact that they turned themselves into commodities. They accepted the rules of a game in which the body outweighed the person, and sexual conquests mattered more than reputation. The outcome of that game is always the same: loneliness in cavernous mansions, illnesses born of excess, and the bitter realization that you were loved only as a pretty image, something to be used and replaced with a newer model. Gloria Grahame, who married her own stepson, or Marlene Dietrich, who died in near-total isolation, were not victims of circumstance. They were the logical endpoint of a path where there was no room for morality, compassion, or reason. The Monroe Code was not created to savor sordid details for their own sake. Its purpose is to crack the code of false worship. We must stop looking at these women through the rose-tinted glasses of nostalgia. Beauty without intellect is a trap. Fame without principles is poison. These actresses gave themselves to everyone except themselves. They never allowed themselves the chance to become something more than the most beautiful animal or the fatal blonde. Let their stories be a lesson. A true icon is not the one who collected a gallery of broken hearts, but the one who preserved dignity in a world where everything is for sale. Hollywood's myths have collapsed. The masks have fallen. All that remains in the archives are dry facts and long lists of names belonging to those who passed through their bedrooms.